Now I'm sending my demands to your mom's Viber. You look for as many journalists as possible. That is, you send them to their mail, emails, phone numbers, call them. Your mom will pass the demands to you. Explain the situation that in Lutsk, a bus full of people has been hijacked. Everything is mined. There are a lot of explosives and automatic weapons on the bus. Besides that, there is a mine planted separately in Lutsk. The authorities have to fulfill the demands. The demands are very simple.
What you just heard is a real recording of a phone conversation between the terrorist and the hostage's son. The man whose voice you just heard locked 13 people in a bus and kept them under the scorching sun in the city center. No, this isn't a story from a faraway country. Everything I'm about to tell you happened right under our noses, in the very center of Lutsk. So, the year is 2020, July 21st, Tuesday. That day, the Krasny-Livka-Berez-Steshko bus followed its usual route. Actually, it's not a traditional bus, but more of a minibus. That's not insignificant because from early morning that day, there was terrible stuffiness outside. And when you're riding in a cramped minibus, without extra ventilation or air conditioning, you realize the trip won't be the most pleasant. But when you have to go, and there's no choice, you have to accept what's available. People gradually filled up the cabin, young, elderly, and basically all kinds. Most of them took their seats at the initial station, but a few more got on at stops along the way to the destination. Among those who entered the cabin was a man. Just like with the others, no one paid much attention to this particular passenger. However, that was only until a certain moment, specifically when this very man walked from his seat to the driver and declared that all the passengers were now his hostages. And if Budai anyone resists, it's the end for them. To prove that he wasn't joking, the perpetrator had quite an arsenal with him. A machine gun, a pistol, and just to make sure, some grenades. Besides, he fired several shots into the ground to make it absolutely clear what was happening here. The suffocating atmosphere inside the minibus suddenly became even more unbearable, mixing with overwhelming fear. The man ordered the driver to handcuff himself to the steering wheel, but he fumbled for a long time, probably because of the same fear. Then he started complaining that the handcuffs were pressing on his wrist. Eventually, the topic of the handcuffs was dropped. Strangely enough, the attacker allowed him to drive without them, and at 9:20 in the morning, contact with the driver was lost. Eventually, the bus stopped at Teatralny Square near the Lesya Ukrainka monument in Lutsk. At first, passers-by didn't realize what was happening. Suspiln Volyn correspondent Vodopad Odin. Mr. Fiden happened to be cycling by and thought there might be a concert from the district. Curious, the journalist rode up to the minibus, stopping near the windshield. He saw the driver, who oddly had his head down, and noticed the bus looked strange with its windows covered by curtains. Some people cautiously peeked out from behind the curtains. A moment later, the journalist realized there would be no concert, but the emotions would definitely be running high. Two police cars rushed up to the bus, one stopped on the left, the other on the right, and at that moment, shots rang out. The terrorist opened fire. Fortunately, no one was hurt, but it was too soon to breathe a sigh of relief. It turned out that at 9:25, the perpetrator himself called the police. He introduced himself, said his name was Maxim Plokoy, and stated that he had explosives with him. Because of the emergency, the city was sealed off, the center closed, police began a hostage operation, and the security service of Ukraine activated the Boomerang Plan. On July 21, representatives of the Security Service of Ukraine Anti-Terrorist Headquarters, the court, the National Guard, rescuers, and a bomb squad all arrived at the Teatralny Square. Residents living nearby were evacuated. Others were strongly advised not to leave their homes. At the time, Minister of Internal Affairs Arsen Avakov went to Lutsk, and President Zelensky said he was managing the situation and aiming to resolve the crisis without casualties. So what did Maxim Plokoy demand? Well, do you see? Let's put it this way. The terrorist started warming up the audience in advance, even before he introduced himself to law enforcement. The perpetrator made several posts on social media. In the morning, on what was then Twitter, he greeted everyone with Anti-System Day and stated, I quote, "The state is the main terrorist."
Happy Anti-System Day. The state has always been and remains the main terrorist. There are many people with me. Automatic weapons, grenades, 2 bombs, and a third one in a crowded place in the city.
3 hours before the attack, a YouTube video showed a man sitting against a wall with an automatic rifle, saying only, "Happy Anti-System Day."
Don't fool yourselves. Speak the truth.
But that's not all. After taking hostages, the criminal made a new post, specifically on Twitter, in which he finally revealed his full demands in writing. I mostly kept the delivery, but made the text easier to read.
The day of the anti-system. The religious, political, oligarchic system of power is essentially terror. The state has always been and remains a terrorist. There are many people with me. Automatic weapons, grenades, 2 bombs, and a third one in a crowded place in the city. All of them will explode if this doesn't happen. The heads of the Constitutional Court of Ukraine, the Supreme Court, the High Council of Justice, the Prosecutor General, the Minister of Justice, the Director of the Criminal Executive Service, the Prime Minister, the Speaker of the Verkhovna Rada, the Minister of Defense, the head of the Security Service of Ukraine, the church leaders Filaret, Epiphany, Anufriy Shevchuk, Ahmed and Mim of the Protestant and Roman Catholic churches. Also Avakov, Poroshenko, Akhmetov, Kolomoisky, Pinchuk, Medvedchuk. Everyone posts on social networks, on their pages and on YouTube, a video message with the text, "I am, last name, first name, patronymic position, I am a terrorist by law." President Zelensky posts a video message with the text, "Everyone should watch the 2005 film Earthlings. Even my death by explosion is not an obstacle." So, the truth from the lips of the 24 will save lives. Happy Anti-System Day. Don't fool yourself, celebrate the truth.
But where do such demands come from? Let's talk a bit later so we don't get lost in the chronology. And for now, let's focus on the bus hijacking. Neither Medvedchuk nor Filaret with Poroshenko or Akhmetov or anyone else from the perpetrators list rushed to record a video as the terrorists demanded. Meanwhile, the minibus passengers were only getting worse. I'm telling you this story in just a few minutes now, but in reality it dragged on for hours. And don't forget, it was July outside and the attackers stopped the bus under the scorching sun, which was literally burning everything alive. Those hostages who had water used up all their supplies pretty quickly, because who would take even a few liters of water with them on a trip? If your destination is within reach, then requirements are just requirements. Law enforcement involved in the special operation should have at least focused on the unfulfilled programs, and if freeing all hostages wasn't possible immediately, they should have at least provided them with food and water. They tried to negotiate with Maxim Plokhy by phone, but it was in vain. The perpetrator refused to make concessions. To achieve his goal, he contacted journalists and put additional pressure on local media workers. Plokhy was the first to make contact himself at around 10 a.m., but it's hard to call that conversation constructive. Here's how it happened.
Have you already shared my demands? No, we haven't received anything yet. The owner of this phone is with you now. I have certain demands. In short, if they're not met, that means there's one explosive device in crowded Lutsk, a bus rigged with explosives, many automatic weapons, and numerous grenades. Understood, yes, understood. My name is Maxim Plokhoy. You can find me on social networks under this pseudonym. I am Maxim Plokhoy. There is a video and all the information posted there. How many people do you have? How are they feeling? Are there many people? Is the bus full? Are there children? Are there pregnant women? How are they feeling? That's our concern now. Let the state take care of it, since it cares about people. And can you tell us your demands? Listen to me, I said bring more journalists. Because if the assault starts, I will blow up the bus, and not only the bus, but also a bomb will go off remotely in a crowded place. Can you repeat your demands for us? I will not repeat my demands for you. They are written down, damn it. Didn't I send them to you on Viber, damn it?
But in a phone conversation with journalists from NTA television channel, Plokhoy stated that the people he is holding hostage are in bad condition. It was impossible to confirm or deny this. The perpetrator tried to involve as many media representatives as possible, even through the relatives of his hostages. One of the women who was trapped following the attacker's orders asked her son in a phone call to contact the publication censor so that more journalists would come to the scene and cover what was happening. But despite the rising tension, no one was in a hurry to fulfill the criminal's demands. Instead, while clarifying details about the perpetrator's identity, it seems that someone rushed ahead and made a mistake. The police first reported the perpetrator had been treated in a psychiatric hospital, but this was later found to be untrue. And it seems that such misinformation made public greatly angered the attacker. At least that's what another hostage stated. During a conversation with journalists, the woman said that there was half an hour to fulfill the criminal's demands and that he was extremely angered by the information about treatment in a psychiatric facility.
Why are they making him nervous? Right, go ahead and write. Get that Zelensky and that Avakov. Let them get off their butts.
But as the lady said, nobody got off their butts anyway. At least not to meet Plokhy's demands. Meanwhile, the perpetrator was really getting nervous and to get what he wanted faster, resorted to extremes. Well, you see, he started throwing grenades out the windows. The first one didn't explode. It was an Ruchnaya Granata Degtyareва 5. Leaving it in the square was extremely dangerous, so the special forces received orders to immediately neutralize the explosive device. The head of the bomb disposal team, Ihor Zabolotny, took charge of the situation.
There was a grenade thrown, and we received the order to approach and remove it because it hadn't exploded. It was an Ruchnaya Granata Degtyareва 5 grenade. They assigned one officer from the Corps of Operational and Sudden Action Unit and one officer from the Special Police Company, both equipped with shields. I took responsibility and we went to the spot. I saw the grenade, quickly disarmed it, then we walked back facing away. It looked just like a real combat grenade, with no signs or indications it was a dummy. I didn't notice anything unusual. If it had gone off, people would have been hit. Its effective radius is 25 meters.
Fortunately, it turned out to be a dummy. However, after the first grenade, a second one followed, and that one was real. The explosion occurred near the front left wheel, and the shrapnel damaged the body of the bus. There were no casualties, at least physically, but psychologically, people suffered a lot during those seconds. Additionally, Maxim Plokhy periodically fired from the windows of the minibus, but dear ones, neither the gunshots nor the grenades made anyone from the list he published record a video and admit to being a terrorist. In the end, Plokhy himself made concessions. After more than 9 hours of holding hostages in a bus, heated to the maximum under the sun, the perpetrator allowed water to be given to the people. It was personally delivered by then First Deputy Head of the National Police Yevhen Koval, but immediately after handing over the water, the terrorist fired above Koval's head. This was considered an attack on a police officer, though the officer was uninjured. And Plokhy stated that he didn't even try to aim at him. The negotiators tried to find an approach to the perpetrator, and then they asked him to at least release the teenager, but he flatly refused and emphasized his refusal with another shot at the window. By that time it was already past 8 in the evening, and around 8:45 a miracle happened. Despite the fact that none of his demands had been met, he released 3 hostages, an elderly woman, a pregnant woman, and a child. And literally less than half an hour later, something happened that probably few people expected. President Volodymyr Zelensky met the perpetrator's demand. He posted a video urging people to watch the film Earthlings, and in the comments he included screenshots of the rest of the text,
which was written by Plokhy. Everyone should watch the 2005 film Earthlings.
Later, it turns out that all this happened for a reason. Zelensky and Plokhy spoke on the phone the day before, and Plokhy promised he would release 3 people if the president fulfilled his demand. Well, that's exactly what happened, but what next? How could the attacker's reaction have been? After all, on the one hand, at least part of his demands was fulfilled, but on the other hand, that part was insignificant. At least if you count the names he wrote in his notes and subtract just 1 from there, maybe that's exactly what the numbers show. Plokhy was busy for the next 40 minutes. I don't know exactly what he was doing, but that's not the main point. Already at 21:40, he released all the hostages. Just like that, he took them and let them go. He left the bus, lay on the ground, and surrendered to the security forces. Still, they brought armored personnel carriers and set off a stun grenade near him. Let's put it this way, just in case, the security service of Ukraine was heavily criticized after this. The institution, however, said it was necessary. According to law enforcement officers, this way they made sure that the perpetrator did not have any other weapons on him.
We suspected that there might be an explosive device left on the bus. We agreed that he would leave the bag on the bus, but we had to make sure that he didn't have a remote control for the device. He was given instructions to raise and lower his hands and to stand still. We scanned the area with hazard detection devices. Only after that did police and security service officers approach him.
Eventually, the show and big furry paws came to an end. It's logical to ask what that was all about and why. Well, to understand that, we need to get a little closer to Maxim Plokhy himself. First of all, Plokhy is a pseudonym. His real name is Maxim Krivosh. This gentleman is originally from Russia, but it's a bit complicated there. His parents first lived in Ukraine, then moved to Russia, where Krivosh Jr. was born, and then they moved back to Ukraine. In the end, the perpetrator was a Ukrainian citizen. If we believe what Plokhy said about himself, he came from an intellectual family. His father was a scientist, and his mother was a teacher and a poet. Plokhy briefly attended a theological seminary, but soon became disillusioned with the church and left. I quote, he chose another path. The motivation to take it was very strong. You see, Plokhy apparently watched a lot of action movies and decided to become cool. That's also a quote. So, from a young age, he tied his life to the criminal world. Before the Lutsk terrorist attack, he had 2 prior convictions and was detained for robbery, fraud, extortion, and illegal weapons possession. In total, the man spent about 11 years in prison, as if that wasn't enough. Plokhy believed he was a writer and that everyone needed to know about his life. That's why in 2014 he published a 560-page autobiographical book in 400 copies called The Philosophy of a Criminal, Apology of Freedom, the Anti-System. In it, the man talked about his own life in prison, philosophized about freedom and justice, sprinkling the text with words of famous thinkers and excerpts from their works. Here are some quotes from that book, for example.
It leaves you with the feeling that you were born for great things, but shine in insignificance. These words of Balzac's character come to mind more and more often. It seems that not everything is lost for me, if such a feeling still lives inside me, and I think you can't truly understand yourself without having frozen in insignificance. Criminals in prisons are divided into 2 categories. The first became criminals out of their strength, the second out of their weakness. The majority are the second type in prison. For them it's like home. Degradation of the soul, mind, and body is their fate. Criminals with inner strength are those who believed in themselves and wanted to become powerful. Already today, here and now. Society's intolerance toward me is a sign that I'm on the right path. The mafia is not a shadow state within the state. The mafia is the state itself. The state system is the highest form of organized crime, which has legalized itself. The law is violence against my will. A criminal is absolute self-acceptance. Happiness is absolute acceptance of oneself, happy, innocent.
If you wonder if the publisher cared about the author's past or similar concerns, the answer is no. This book was printed by the publishing house Volyn Polygraph. They said that the manuscript was carefully read and checked before publication. They found nothing forbidden in it, and they were also aware of the author's past. They said the man was in prison and wanted to tell his relatives through the book. By the way, about the relatives, Plokhy. He was also once married and had a son, but family life, according to those who knew their family, did not turn out very well. Neighbors say Plokhy used to beat his wife and son, but unlike his relatives, he really loved animals and took care of them for the last 5 years, according to acquaintances. He even cooperated with a relevant organization. All the volunteers who knew Plokhy through this activity described him as a polite, reserved person who never showed aggression. But it should be noted that these people knew nothing about Krivosh's criminal record. In short, it turns out to be a strange mix. Krivosh holds anti-system views and has a criminal past, but he is also married with a son. That seems to fit within the system's framework. Additionally, the Eternal Rebels systematically helped animals through cooperation with a specialized organization. In short, it's hard to catch any logic here. And finally, don't forget that Krivos turned to terrorism. Usually, something pushes a person to such radical actions. For example, some turning point happens in their life. But it seems that nothing like that happened in Krivos's case. At least he himself never mentioned anything like that.
Injustice, or rather the desire for justice, was the main motive.
The hijacking of the bus with hostages. Krivos called it a performance at the court hearing where his preventive measure was being decided, but he couldn't clearly and precisely explain why he chose that particular format for the performance. There were a lot of unnecessary words that didn't always form coherent sentences, generally speaking. He said something about being dissatisfied with the fact that people live within a system, and he also really doesn't like that people are used to shifting responsibility onto someone else. And even the hostages he was holding aren't innocent because they're also part of that same system. Krivos explained his thoughts a bit better later on in a long interview with a journalist. Answering briefly is clearly not his thing, so I'll give you a short version. So,
Injustice in relationships between people is one factor. Themis, justice, have always been corrupt and remain so, but absolute injustice, our attitude as humans toward animals, probably played a role. The fact that I myself spent many years in a cage in captivity helps me better understand what those creatures feel. The film Earthlings is about terrorists and hostages. The first are people, the second are other animal species. Taking hostages, freeing them, it's a symbolic gesture. I called on Earthlings to free the hostages.
when the Earthlings filmmakers learned Krivos was holding hostages and demanding the president promote their film, they did not support this so-called justice fighter. The director, representing the team, expressed sympathy for the hostages and was relieved it ended without casualties. He specifically emphasized that the team does not approve of or justify acts of terror because their message is compassion for all living beings. Also, as it turned out, Krivos had planned his crime differently. He planned from the start to take hostages in Lutzk's central cathedral. But in the end, he abandoned this idea because he realized it would be harder to control the situation there. Well, harder than on a bus. He supposedly wasn't planning to kill anyone, even more than that. He specifically took some water and medicine with him, like aspirin and sedatives, in case any of the hostages felt unwell.
I want to disappoint those who love action movies. Blood was not part of my plans. If the blood of a police hostage had been spilled, it would have discredited the idea of what I was doing. If I realized that the situation was getting out of control, the performance would have been stopped. This is not a terrorist attack.
This is a true artist's performance. Krivos stated that he didn't choose the bus by accident. He allegedly tried to hijack one that didn't have any children on board. Initially, that's how it was, but at one stop the driver picked up a mother and child, so the plan failed. The criminal insisted that he didn't physically threaten anyone, let alone hit anyone. He said Krivos and the hostages were even joking. And as for the fact that no one spoke well of him in court anymore, that according to the criminal was the work of the law enforcement officers, who, in his opinion, told the victims what and how to say. And in general, the hostages should actually be grateful to Krivos, as he believes.
I believe that by and large they should be grateful for having been participants in my action. Most people are hostages to the authorities their whole lives, and they just endure it. They're happy with the whip and satisfied with the carrot. No one complains about the carrot, but here it's a rebellion not in words, but in deeds, and not for money, but for justice.
Although not all of Krivos's demands were met, he did not plan to keep people captive. According to its creator's plan, the performance, if you can call it that, was supposed to end by 10:30 post-meridium. In the dark, the attacker thought it would be easy to take him out, but the main issue was the demand to Zelensky. So, Krivos supposedly got what he wanted. Let me remind you that he personally spoke with the head of state by phone, and they agreed that as soon as Krivos released 3 hostages, the president would publish a video urging people to watch the film Earthlings.
I said I will release 3 hostages, and you post a video message telling everyone to watch the film Earthlings after it has been online for half an hour. I will release the other 10. I want to emphasize that the decision to release the 10 was made by me alone. It wasn't like they say that he asked me to release everyone.
Whether it was like that or not, it doesn't really matter that much. The important thing is all the hostages returned home alive and the terrorist was jailed. Zelensky was criticized for his calls with the terrorist. There was criticism, though not from everyone. Supporters of the president argued this isn't the way to negotiate with terrorists. Not everyone can do this. Only specially trained people can. VDM. With the Lutsk perpetrator, the demands weren't political or a security threat, so the president's intervention wasn't a catastrophe. However, their opponents thought the demands themselves were unimportant. A terrorist act falls under the security service of Ukraine, not the president. And Zelensky, by his actions, showed that anyone can get their moment of fame. Let's put it this way. You just need to put on as loud a show as possible to attract attention. This could be debated at length, especially in this video's comments. And if we return to the topic of Kravosh, here's what we have. The case was considered for more than 2 years at every session, whenever there was an appropriate opportunity. The performer gladly communicated with journalists and never once admitted to doing anything wrong, quite the opposite. Mostly, Kravosh just talked more about his views, as if mocking the judges and others who were unenlightened. The forensic psychiatric exam found Maxim Kravosh sane. Why was he pleased, or did he even fail at this? He couldn't help but comment on the situation in his own way.
I will not repent in court. There was an attempt by the investigation to make me look mentally ill. Whether they changed their mind or something didn't work out for them, I don't know. The psychiatrist found me to be completely healthy. Again, mental health is a relative concept, it's manipulation, and those who make diagnoses profit from it. The conclusion is that I am sane, I can be held responsible for my actions, and that's good. That's how it should be.
Kravosh was tried for hostage-taking, illegal weapon possession, terrorism, and attempting to murder a law enforcement officer. The court announced the verdict on September 26, 2022. Maxim Kravosh was convicted on all charges and sentenced to 13 years in prison. The criminal said he doesn't consider himself guilty and still doesn't, but won't appeal the verdict as he thinks it's pointless.
At 44, I've realized you must create life's meaning yourself, as it doesn't exist otherwise. There are words like love, justice, and truth, which we sometimes call the meaning of life, but they need to be proven. And when your conscience tells you that you can do more, but you don't because you're afraid of the law, punishment, or something else, then you're backing down in front of yourself. I don't like that. The time came when I asked myself, what is the maximum action I am capable of? What will give meaning to life and improve justice on a global scale?
Whether Kravosh later changed his views is unknown, but judging by everything, he is still serving his sentence to this day. The last time the criminal was mentioned in the media was in 2023, clarifying that the perpetrator is in a correctional colony in Rivne region. According to the head of the Horodishche Correctional Colony, number 96 Yuri Tkachuk, the convict violated the detention regime but did not have any conflicts during his time in the facility. The criminal communicates with outsiders, but in the colony he hasn't had any visits or meetings with anyone. Interestingly, Kravosh is not involved in work at the colony, but it's not just because he doesn't want to work himself.